Hello, everybody. We are a couple minutes over, so we're going to go ahead and get started right now. Good afternoon, and welcome to World Water Week 2024, and to our session entitled Just Transitions for Water Security, Taking Collective Action to Scale. My name is Ingrid Timbo. I'm the Deputy Executive Director and Senior Policy Lead at the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, or AGWA, and it's my pleasure to be your MC for the next 90 minutes or so. So the overall theme of this year's conference is Bridging Borders, Water for a Peaceful and Sustainable Future. And this session in particular falls squarely within the theme of interconnectivity at all scales. As we all are acutely aware, the world has entered a period of rapid and uneven change, which is reverberating across all aspects of society, be it geopolitical, economic, ecological, climatic, technological. These changes are often interconnected and interact in unexpected and novel ways, which make planning and governance at all scales more complicated. When it comes to water specifically, these changes are converging to undermine and even reverse progress on improving water security, particularly in low and middle income countries. Historically, water is managed first and foremost at the local level for the very sensible reason that hydrologic systems are highly complex and sensitive to local conditions, which impact the ways in which water moves across, above, and through a landscape. However, water systems are also impacted by conditions and events far removed. And as any freshwater scientist will tell you, if you want to affect the water in any given place, you need to move upstream. Perhaps all the way to the headwaters and perhaps outside of the confines of the stream itself and into the broader catchment or ecosystem. So today's session will focus on these upstream conditions in the form of a new global initiative called the Just Transitions for Water Security Program. JTWS, as we're gonna shorten it, because everything's an acronym, was announced, and I don't wanna say Just Transitions for Water Security 40 times, was announced by the UK government at COP28 in Dubai last December, and believes that if we wanna have the greatest impact on improving local water security, we have to go upstream. To look at policies, regulatory frameworks, markets, and flows of trade and finance to determine how and where we can have the greatest impact. This is not a new insight, of course, but what is new in my view is the emphasis on the ways in which these upstream processes are designed and whether or not they are fit for purpose to meet the global moment in which we find ourselves today. Are our current governance systems designed to operate effectively in a world marked by rapid climate change? And if not, what do we need to be doing differently? This is what JTWS is about. So without further ado, I'm gonna quickly take us through today's agenda and introduce our first speakers. So first, we're gonna hear from the mastermind behind JTWS, Andy Roby, who will kind of give us a little bit of an overview of the program. And then we have scene-setting remarks from Virginia Newton-Lewis, who's gonna talk a little bit more about kind of this moment that we find ourselves in. And then you get to hear specifically from the coalition partners from JTWS to talk about their specific entry points, their work streams under this initiative. And then we'll take questions and do a quick wrap up. So hopefully that sounds good to everyone. Without further ado, Andy, the floor is yours.
So, do these mics work? Yeah, thank you. It's really great to be here. Indeed, it was 5 years ago, my first visit to the World Water Week, that I think the kernel of an idea for this program started. And it started because as a newcomer to the water sector, I realized, or I felt very strongly that there was not enough sense of urgency about the global water crisis at that 2019 event. I started asking, I started talking to people and finding out if other people shared that view. And I think 5 years on, we do now have a sense of urgency at this event about the global water crisis. But in the meantime, I started talking with people like Nick, with Kate Lamb, with John Matthews about what are the sort of big drivers of change that are going to really disrupt the way we do water security going forward. And I wanted to take you through how that thinking has been reflected in FCDO. We've been long-term investors in water, and particularly WASH, over many, many years. And one of the things that we've now stopped doing is direct investment in wash infrastructure. We do that very rarely. We do it at pilot level. We do it to demonstrate change, which is a difficult thing for people in the water community to accept. But our scarce grant money, and it will never be enough to solve the global water crisis on its own, we think should be used differently. We think it should be used through systems change, looking at the big drivers that are going to shift whole systems. And therefore, this approach of aid being spent on... I can see this down there. Is there a way I can see that? No, doesn't matter. Okay, I've got my notes. We're all right. And we have moved away from sort of some of the interventionist stuff on disaster relief and trying to get in earlier and preempt those disasters. And a little bit away from looking at water as just a human health issue and seeing it as a whole economy, whole society issue. And as mismanagement continues in the water sector, climate change is making it worse. And so, here are the new drivers of change. We looked at civil society and the lack of accountability that's apparent. NGOs who are after odour rather than holding governments and corporates to account. Market forces that are not working to promote water security. Investors who are concerned but don't understand how to make that concern work. Trade measures, barriers to investment, things like water pricing that the Global Commission on the Economics of Water have identified as a key issue were not being talked about. Subsidies, perverse subsidies in the agriculture sector, for instance. And then this shift from grey to green infrastructure. And finally, the role of diplomats. And as part of the FCDO now, part of our role is to equip our diplomats with the tools to talk about water and to make it a political issue in the countries that we want to support and help. So we came up with this plan, basically, that we would look at the policy interventions that set the direction in a country through national adaptation plans and the like. We'd look at the governance, the structures, the organizations, the institutions, the rules that will govern how water is used. And then we'd look at the investment side. What are the things that investors are looking for in order to make investments? And they've said to us all along, we want to invest in water, but we can't see any money in it. So you're back to pricing, you're back to the risks, you're back to very difficult situations in terms of investment. Let me just go back. Yeah. Ooh. Does it go back? Oh. Sorry, I'm doing something wrong. Here we go. You don't have much more of this, don't worry. And the other thing is the way that you work. I've worked in this development field for nearly 40 years now, and there's no manual for this, and there's no blueprint for development. Every country, every situation is different. Water is definitely no exception. It's very location specific. So we need to take this adaptive programming approach of trying stuff, failing fast, and shifting when it fails, and magnifying when it works. So adapt, try, learn, and iterate is key to this new program. Haha. The theory of change, and that, believe you me, is a simplified version. So those are the three streams as they work through. And at the end of the day, we're looking, of course, for more resilient people in a very increasingly vulnerable and stressed world. And that's the outcome that we're looking for. So without any more to do, let's get on with who's in the room from the consortium and who's going to take all the difficult questions, I hope. It's a 39 million program over 5 years, and we've got 3 essential work streams. And it's fantastic from my point of view to see that most of these organizations have stuck with me over the last 5 years as we prepared and thought about this and tried to get the evidence together to make a decent business case. I'm glad that IMI are leading the first one, which is the climate policy work, and that's based around this water resilient tracker. Get that right. And that, as you know, was promoted at COP26 and has turned out to be very popular. I learned yesterday that 51 countries are now queuing up to use this. And I'm suspicious of tools, but this is a tool with an end. It's a tool that takes you into a process of working out where you're at risk and what you need to do. It's very exciting. And if you're interested, hear more. And of course, we have IMI leading that, Agua, the brains behind it, Deltaris with all their experience, and Arup, who are just about everywhere doing some great stuff. So I'm very, very, very pleased about that. The second area, which was governance, is around this concept of water stewardship. And those of you at COP26 know that we launched the Fair Water Footprint initiative with a number of leading countries and leading organizations and companies. And from that, we have a partnership. It's a political agreement to do more, and we've fixed those 5 targets in areas of WASH, of NBS, sustainable abstraction, pollution, and resilience. So there we have the lead of that is CDP, who are in the room, and they, of course, are coming in from the disclosure investment business side, but we also have Water Witness helping with accountability and building that up. Chatham House, a neutral space for these discussions to go on, but also deeply embedded in the trade side, because this is only going to work if we're embedding these changes in trade systems and markets. And then finally, in our theory of change, which, if you remember, starts with policy, goes through governance, investment. We're not going to succeed unless we get private sector investment into the water sector. And WaterAid led this initiative with then Prince Charles, I think about 4 years ago now, Kate, and we've got this kernel of an idea that if we work on the policy reform matters, we get pipelines of investment. These are really to identify what needs to shift in terms of government policy. I'm going to leave it there and hand on, I think, is it through you, Ingrid, to Virginia, and then you can quiz everybody else about this program as I step aside and let them get on with it. I should say that we signed the last grant on Thursday, so it really is live. Thank you.
Woo! Thank you, Andy. So as Andy mentioned, next up we have Virginia Newton-Lewis, the Director of Water Sustainability at Grundfos, to inspire us. Before we hand it over to the project, to Kate and the project partners.
Thank you very much, Andy, and hello, everybody. It's so lovely to be with you this afternoon. It's also wonderful to be with the teams from the Water Tracker, the Resilient Water Accelerator, and the Fair Water Footprints team. And I feel a bit like I'm somehow part of this extended family, as I've been following these initiatives for several years. And I'm so happy to see you working together at this new milestone to unlock new opportunities. The world is facing the crises of water, climate change, and nature loss. And these 3 are very interconnected. Most of you, especially in this room, are probably familiar with the statistics that we use to describe the situation. The 2 billion people who still lack access to safely managed water, or possibly that's 4 billion if the new estimates from science are right. The projections of 40% shortfalls in water supply by 2030. The huge proportion of wastewater that flows untreated into our rivers and seas. And the nearly 2 billion people facing worrying flood risk. This, compounded by climate change, calls us all to the enormous task of building resilience while we work to reduce inequality. We hear these statistics at most water events, sometimes several times a day, and I'm willing to bet that you've probably already heard some of these today. It's 4 o'clock, I'm sure you already have. The repetition, though, might make you feel a bit numb, a bit desensitized to the situation that we're facing, and I know that I definitely feel that way sometimes. In fact, I quite often skip over the statistics bit of any report. But in my job, I spend time talking to people who don't know about the water crisis, or at least don't really understand the scale of the water crisis. And their shocked responses when we discuss these kinds of numbers is a reminder that the situation is grim, the injustices are glaring, and the pace of action has been too slow for too long. It's also a reminder that the water crisis is still not as visible as its climate cousin. These same people that I talk to, they know all about climate change and they know all about net zero. And that means that there's so much more that we need to do to raise awareness outside of this very watery bubble. So we need to work differently. We need to work differently if we're to respond at anywhere near the speed required to match the scale of the challenge. This means trying new ways of working and finding new opportunities, exactly what the Just Transitions for Water Security Programme, JTWS, I'm going to get this wrong, Ingrid, is all about. It sounds a bit like a boy band, I think. When I look at the scope of the programme, I see innovation and I see possibility. The water tracker in the ways that it brings together water and climate action, the Resilient Water Accelerator in its approach to tackling the climate financing gap, and the Fair Water Footprint with its focus on transnational levers of water action, including trade. This last one to me is so important because the fact that water is very much a local problem runs the risk of us overlooking some global levers of systems change. An example I often use, and I see Scott in the audience here, is the potential of the international standard system to drive action and galvanise regulation. The recent launch of JTWS is timely too, because in 2024, the changes we see in the wider water landscape arguably give more space for new ways of working and collaboration. For the first, well, maybe not the first time, but definitely since a long time, it feels like things are happening in water. New legislation, technological innovation, AI, the global goal on adaptation, the rise of water and nature positive movements, and new players in global water conversations all mean that approaches to water action are shifting. Some of the things I've just listed may turn out to be a flash in the pan, and you can come and talk to me afterwards about which ones of those I think they are. Some of them are happening in silos and may not result in much change, and some are operating at different levels from the transnational to the local. But all, I would argue, are altering pathways to water security and climate resilience in some way. New opportunities are opening, and others perhaps are closing. The question is, can we harness these things to reach our water and climate resilience goals more quickly? And I think the answer here is definitely yes. There are many ways that we could harness the momentum. I'm going to talk about just 3, but I'm sure we'll hear many more suggestions in the later panel discussions, some probably slightly closer to your programs. Firstly, can we better use the interconnectedness of the water, climate, and nature crises to our advantage? While the water community is working towards water goals, our peers in net zero and in nature are also pushing for systems change. Climate action creates new fronts for water action and vice versa. The water tracker team know this well. But there are also plenty of untapped opportunities to pool ideas across these sectors and learn together. Can we, for example, reach out and borrow ideas from Net Zero's experience in shifting from voluntary to regulated action and navigate parts of the course that they've already charted? Can we avoid some of the traps and pitfalls that they've already been through? And can we use their examples of community mobilization and what I like to call red pen activism, which is essentially a form of targeted advocacy, to our advantage? The second area is legislation and the really significant new rules impacting corporate water use. In Europe, we have the triple whammy of the CSRD, the EU taxonomy, and the CSDDD, and I apologize for the acronyms, but many of you are familiar with this. The implications of these directives are rippling across the world as companies bring their operations outside Europe into line with the new requirements. It's changing the reality of corporate water management by dramatically increasing the number of companies who now need to report, monitor, and hopefully, although not as a given, act on water. Can we use this legislation as a platform to drive wider systemic change? For example, by simplifying the complex landscape of water stewardship guidance so that more companies understand how to take action that goes beyond minimum requirements. And lastly, we're seeing new governments commit to stronger water action, particularly Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi. Both are investing heavily in water technologies, alongside, I have to say, Egypt and Morocco as well, And both will be more active in the global agenda as they're going to be hosting large water conferences in the coming years and therefore setting the discussion points. What this means for transformative water action isn't clear yet, but it could shift discourses and priorities within water. Perhaps we can use the new energy that their voices and investment bring to amplify all aspects of the water crisis, not just water scarcity. It's something to think about. So, to conclude, we urgently need to work in new ways to achieve our goals for water security and climate resilience. 2024 and the early work of the Just Transitions for Water Security programme provide a brilliant opportunity to do just that. And I hope that during the course of this session, through your week in Stockholm and as you scale up, you continue to look sideways to your peers here today for inspiration, but also your peers in disciplines and initiatives adjacent to your own. I invite you to identify opportunities beyond your bubble and take action together. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. And so in that spirit of working together, I am going to invite my colleague Kate Hughes to come forward and hand it over to her to moderate our panel discussion.
Hi. Wow, that's bright. Yeah, I've got to work out where to stand. And hopefully, can you hear me? Because I'm wearing a really fancy microphone, which is very exciting as well. And I'm delighted to be here. My name's Kate Hughes, and I lead the Resilient Water Accelerator Programme, which is part of the programme that we're talking about here today. This is my first World Water Week, so I'm very excited to be here. I'm not yet quite, fed up with all of the stats, although, there are many, many of them. And I've also heard that this is the event of the day. So congratulations for being here in this room and being part of this discussion. And what hopefully I think already is a really inspiring and motivating session. We're trying to lift our sights up. These are huge global challenges and we need to think of them in that way. So thank you to Andy for being the brains behind this and to Virginia for kind of setting out that call to action for all of us on this. Things are happening, Virginia said at the beginning. Absolutely true. There is a lot of stuff happening. And the real challenge now is how do we knit that together? Piecemeal approaches, bit by bit, aren't going to work. And to give you one of my favourite statistics which came out earlier this year, so we know that climate change is all about water. How do people experience climate change? They experience it through water. And research earlier this year showed that $38 trillion in damages each year is hitting the world economy. And we are already committed to an income reduction of 19% to the global economy due to climate change. That's huge. So if we're going to think about how we're going to work to that scale of challenge, we do need to think bigger and we need to take this systems approach. And we know that implementation, all the things that are happening aren't happening as fast as it needs to happen. And it needs to also deliver in the long term as well. The sticking plaster isn't going to work. If you're there with chronic long-term diabetes and you've broken your hip, a sticking plaster isn't the solution that you need. And that's why we need to think bigger about what's happening with water as well. We need this new paradigm where we can build that upfront resilience into the systems. And not just the system and the individual project, but the system as a whole. So thinking about the whole economic, political, and societal approach. And those are the elements that Andy set out in this programme. That's what we're trying to do with this programme here. And that's what we're really excited to tell you about and to test this new approach. So we're going to hear a bit more about the Resilient Water Accelerator in a minute from my colleague, but I guess just by way of introduction, we're, as Andy said, kind of the mobilising, catalysing finance piece, and we're going to hear about some of these different approaches as well. So that's why we're excited to be part of this programme, and that's what we're going to hear about. And then we have time for questions as well. So get your thinking caps on, think about what you want to test our panel on when we get to the Q&A. So first of all, we've got a real-life guest speaker, and if it all works, Idris will appear on a screen as well. And we're going to look at how to use the policy and advocacy elements for that long-term change as well. So Serene, come up and join me upstage. It's you. I feel a bit like Eurovision as well. That's. Please welcome Serene up to the stage. Serene Malik. And she's Executive Secretary of ANEW, which is the African Civil Society Network for Water and Sanitation, and Vice Chair of the SWA Steering Committee, and is a lawyer by profession and by training. So we are all watching what we're saying as well. And Idris is hopefully going to appear on the screen as well. Idris has got an amazing kind of background as well. So over a decade of experience in water resources management, climate resilience, environmental policy. He's worked in the UN, the EU, the World Bank, the ADB, and he's been involved in influential government positions in Afghanistan, including being Deputy Minister for Policy and International Affairs in the Afghanistan National Environmental Protection Agency. So let's hear it for Idris and Serene, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat with them. So I'm going to, Idris, let's test it out and check that you can hear us, and he's thumbs up, brilliant. So I'm going to put the same first question to both of you, which is, we've been hearing about how we need to think in this systems way. We've been hearing about how we need to change the policy environment and so on. So maybe, Idris, you can tell us a bit about how what you're doing is looking to change that policy landscape for these climate and water challenges. What are you doing that will impact that on the ground?
Thank you, Kate. A very good afternoon or good evening there. I'm working now, just as a part of introduction, as the Director of Water Resilience Tracker. So now we are in the second phase of the Water Resilience Tracker, which is a program, a diagnostic tool actually, designed it's based on the assumption if climate action is to be effective, the role of water must be recognized in this through different dynamic trade-offs. So the Water Resilience Tracker, what we actually working with is having four main parts or main sections where we look into water in national climate plans. We look into institutional frameworks and water governance. We also looked into water and climate connection in specific sectors, and also we zoom in and investigate climate finance in the national climate documents. In phase one, what we were doing at AGWA is to look at the NDCs, nationally determined contributions, and NAPs, and that was at the very national level. And we also were looking or applying the Water Resilience Tracker application to the national development plans or documents. So that was the level of what we were actually doing now in phase one. Now what we are doing in phase two is kind of deepening our country level activities. We want to go from the national level, investigating their country's plans, national climate plans and documents, to the subnational level, to the regional, provincial, if we can go to the watershed level. So it's more of development and extension of our questionnaire and guidance document, and increasing the depth of in-country activities. So for that, as let me see, I cannot see the whole, okay, yeah. So, so for that, to be able to go to that depth of work, as Andy said, we joined forces with EMI, Deltares, and ARUP, plus AGWA. So as a team, we are working together on this with the water resilient resilient water accelerator and fair water footprint, which is all brought together with the support of the FCDO. So that's the basics of just the part of introduction for the water resilience tracker, who we are working with. And to your question, that what we are doing at the ground level, as I said, we look into different documents of national levels. So if I may take you through the process, thinking of if a country is developing a climate plan, there are different needs from different organizations or different institutions. We have ministries of Ministry of Agriculture in most countries, having big demands for water. Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Public Work, or domestic users. So there are different needs for the same volume of water that we have in a country from different organization or different institution to meet their goals. And that's in a time where climate change is kind of changing everything, impacting the water cycle. So that's where our question comes, is how and when is water addressed in these plans, and how is water managed when these plans are being implemented or at the implementation phase. If we ask these questions rightly at the right time, that changes the status of a project from a failure to success. So these are the important questions that we need to ask at the very planning stages. So and we are there to ensure that the plans are robust and to cope with the climate impacts that we expect to happen to them. So from my own experience, if I am not over the time.
I might hurry you up a little, but yeah, go for it, because
Okay.
we want to hear about your personal experience.
So with that, if I make it shorter, being somebody who led the climate agenda of Afghanistan for almost 3 years, that was our biggest problem. As Andy said, we do not have enough resources to invest on every project that we get. That's why, from my calculation in Afghanistan, we didn't even had 1% of the required budget for the projects that we needed. Our NDC was asking for $11 billion to tackle climate change, both on adaptation and mitigation side. But think of it, our all annual budget or 5 years budget wouldn't be more than $100 or $150 million with the international funding. So to have that situation and have demand from all of the institutions or ministries that their project should be priority, I think Water Resilience Tracker is a tool. If I had it back then, that would be a blessing to know what projects are our priority, which project we can invest. So I will just leave it at this, and we'll take next question after sitting.
Thank you so much, Idris, and that kind of really clear articulation of, if you've got it in the plan, then you can prioritize, you can think about the budgets, you can work out what you're going to go for first, and you can bring together all of those different elements and work out how to do it. So Serene, let's come to you as well. What does it look like in terms of your work as well, in terms of how you're looking to change that policy framework? What's happening on the ground that's really shifting the dial?
Thank you, Kate. I think first it's just really important for us to celebrate 4 years of work. So please do give us a round of applause. Andrew undersold it, but yeah, it's been actually, this is before anything. This, I think the Fair Water Footprint Program is really a testament to partnership between the South and the North. The running joke is we always say that Fair Water Footprint, the parents are ANU and Water Witness International, and then we have Uncle Roby and Uncle John as well over there. So when the signing took place, I believe on Thursday, it was really not only an inspiring moment, a motivating moment, but also an emotional one, because this was really work that was done consistently, unabated efforts in the boiler room for 4 years to actually get it where it is. It was also a demonstration that northern partners, when you put us southern partners at the forefront, we will get results. This is probably a new way of working. It's probably being done, but it wasn't even not as obvious as what we had seen in the Fair Water Footprint program. Us in the south were given spaces at the highest level, in the north, panels with ministers. So it really started with giving us value, increasing our value, and really taking us as equal partners. So what is it that we seek to change? So of course, now I usually don't read notes, but because Nick goes through so much trouble to prepare to prepare us for this, I think it's just in terms. How many of you know about the Fair Water Footprints, or is it clear in terms of what it is? I know Barbara does, Leslie. Okay, those are not very many hands. So it's pretty much like, and Andy mentioned, you know, there was a problem that was seen. And recently we heard about the dying rivers in Africa, and all this is connected in the sense that, yes, while in the south we use our water for industrial purposes, irrigation, food, well-being, the north as well is heavily dependent on the water that is being extracted and used. And this is made worse by the fact that it's not a secret that our governance is not great and that we're heavily impacted by climate change. So it's not so much about reducing water use, but just using it in a responsible way so that it may benefit everyone. It was really shocking to hear basin organizations about just even 10 days ago talk about the dying rivers in Africa. And the culprit, a lot of them were actually these big industries that were extracting water. But of course, we have also other culprits. So this is where the Fair Water Footprint really comes in. Now, for governments, what does this mean? Of course, Andy mentioned the issue of trade agreements, you know, the influence, policies, but also creating enabling environments, but also being, you know, pushing a bit more in terms of regulation. After all, on the continent, it is only 16 countries that have a Water Act, so that says a lot. So hopefully this should be able to bring some much needed policy reform or policy change on the continent. For the private sector, I only have 2 words for you: cost and schedule. Why you should get involved? Cost and schedule. And for civil society, of course, we are the foot soldiers on the ground in terms of data collection, in terms of holding governments accountable, litigation, which is something that we had also looked at, you know, mobilizing communities, you know, and the work that we usually do, which is sometimes clear and sometimes unclear. Today I heard it's being called parallel governments, which is not entirely true, but well. Now, in terms of how else can we, for us, in terms of civil society, we do know there's still a massive issue when it comes to accountability and monitoring. And I think this is really where we're going to step in. But not only that, the policy work, and by that I do not mean the surface level policy where we make a nice shiny brochure with a policy written. No, this means really going all the way with that kind of policy, whether it be an administrative recommendation, whether it be a ministerial decree, whether it be legislation in the most extreme cases. So I think we've equally built our capacity, our numbers to be able to achieve some of this work. So we're really looking forward to the future. This is great. Like I said, more importantly, this was really a demonstration. If we hold our hands together, treat ourselves with respect, and as equal partners, we can truly achieve great things. And I'll let Nick do the numbers that he put here. Thank you.
Thank you. So don't go anywhere, Serene. No. Come back. Yeah, we're not done with you yet. But first of all, I mean, sorry. That was... Look, I think fascinating, and what you kind of really brought out there as well about that partnership between North and South and the value of actually forging and building proper partnerships there as well. And it's not just, you know, the value of water, which I think everyone will be talking about a lot here today, but really valuing the people and the work and that deep policy making. And maybe, Idris, I can come back to you on kind of that that issue as well, because you've sat there, you know, as you said, you've worked in Afghanistan, you've seen it on the front line, and now with the water tracker as well. How do we really help countries integrate this into their national planning in a way where there's real ownership and there's real involvement and engagement into that deep policy making, and really bringing out that story of why water is critical to integrate throughout those plans?
Yep.
Thank you, Kate. I believe from my own experience, it was in a way embarrassing to see from the GCF. I'm giving an example from that. We sent them 5 or 10 or above 10 concept notes, and the GCF came to us and saying that there are these 4 projects with the same kind of idea with different words and kind of overlapping activities, and this is something that you have to fix within the country first. So the problem within the countries, from where I'm coming at least, and I know there are a number of those countries that having the problem of not talking to each other within the ministries. So ministers and the teams are really busy into looking into their own portfolio, their own projects, but they are always in majority cases, they are missing what is happening next to them. For instance, if someone is working in the Ministry of Agriculture, they often don't look into Ministry of Energy, that how much water they might need. So from that example, I remember that we brought all the relevant ministries sat together for 2 weeks and working half days for 2 weeks, and just to go through the project, the list of the project, and see where are the overlaps, where is something that one project could complement the other project. So from that experience, I believe, if I was thinking when I was introduced to Water Resilience Tracker, if we had a tool like this, and we were working with AGWA, or now the Just Transition for Water Security program, that would have been a blessing, that you look, having a program or initiative looking at your policy, your national documents, the other program is looking into the investments for you, and the other program is taking care of the private sector side. So that's a complete value chain that you have within this program, and would have been very helpful. So from my experience, it will be really beneficial for the countries, as Andy mentioned, that we have 50 countries waiting, and they know that what they are getting through Water Resilience Tracker, and how much their work would be benefited from the Water Resilience Tracker and the overall JTWS program.
Great, thank you. So that kind of real challenge of joining up across within governments. I mean, I used to work in the UK government. I know how difficult it is in governments to do that. And Sri, maybe we can pick that up, because it's not just joining up across governments. It's that connection then, so that governments can talk to communities, and communities can talk to governments, and actually they can hear each other and talk across that divide. So actually they're learning from each other. So again, it would be great to hear a bit more from you, because that's a core part as well of joining up those conversations and helping bring those voices to the fore.
That is possible probably in an environment that has been enabled in terms of allowing that interaction to take place, where participation is recognized by the powers that be. But I think it's also in terms of how we, last week when we were in Abuja with all the member states, we asked them, why have you not prioritized water yet? Why? And we've been at this for 3 decades. We received the most fascinating answer, which was, it's not packaged well enough, or the evidence is not clear as to how water is a key development driver. More needed to be done in terms of embedding water in the development agenda, but also in terms of how this information was brought to them in their language, in something they could understand. So let's start just with that. I mean, that's already where the issue is. Second is also in terms of what exists on the ground. You have countries that do not even have a Ministry of Water or Sanitation. Kenya, South Africa, a couple of countries, Uganda, Tanzania, a little bit more advanced in the sense that certain institutions are already in place. Recently, presidential advisors' positions were created to allow for this. But we also discovered in our work that it takes beyond the water sector in terms of involving, of getting things done. Didn't just sit within the water sector, but more with supreme audit institutions, for example, and getting them to speak this language so that they can actually influence. And this is actually, I think, a new way of looking at it. When we look at the issues of litigation, yes, we're collecting the evidence, but who is it that's actually dealing with the issue if it's not the justice system? So I think it's also looking at beyond the water sector. I think sometimes we're a bit too guilty of this tunnel vision or this echo chamber that we're in, and whereby there are other players who can really help us advance it. But it was surprising to hear member states say that the evidence was not being adequately packaged for their use. And this is something I think that this program, I know with Nick here, will make sure that we package it in their language. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And look, that's an amazing segue. So, Serene, Idris, thank you so much. Let's say thank you to them, but they're not going to go too far, so think about your questions for them in a minute. But we're going to move now on in a seamless way to kind of this second bit of the conversation, which is then picking up on speaking beyond the water sector. How do we take this conversation to other players beyond just governments? And how do we think about involving the private sector, investors, banks, corporations, supply chains, this kind of much wider landscape who've got interests and money, which are important for all of this. So again, we have a 3D participant here and a 2D participant, which is excellent. So first of all, Dr. Nick Hepworth, Executive Director of Water Witness International and co-author of the Fair Water Footprint Declaration and holder of some stats that we're going to hear about maybe. Or maybe over drinks later if you want to do that. And on screen, Philip Abosi, who is the Resilient Water Accelerator Country Coordinator based in Lagos in Nigeria. So we'll come to Philip in a minute. Hi, Philip. Great to see you, as always. And we're going to, Nick, kind of come to you first in terms of these questions, this kind of things coming together and needing to kind of look beyond and raise our sights in terms of what we're doing. So tell us a bit about how you see the Fair Water Footprint really changing how the private sector thinks about water security and climate resilience. What's getting them going?
Right. Well, Serene did a great job of explaining what Fair Water Footprint is all about, much better than she would have had she referred to the painstaking notes that my team prepared for her. But I'll come to the stats, but to put it bluntly, Fair Water Footprint is about rewiring the global economy so that to end the abuse of water in our global supply chains and to make sure that trade, finance and investment and business accelerates rather than undermine progress towards water resilience and the Sustainable Development Goals. For the private sector and finance community, that's about pulling the levers of change which will drive action to avoid water harms like pollution and over-abstraction and abuse of the human right to water and sanitation, and to promote the good things, the water stewardship, the collective action, the co-investment in water security. A lot of work. The good news is that many of the tools that we need to do that are at hand. They've been tested, they've been developed. We've got the CDP disclosure work, we've got the Alliance of Water Stewardship Standard, we've got the WWF risk filter, and these tools that allow us to engage with and understand water use in the global economy. But they're still far too niche. They're used by a handful of countries in a handful of places at a handful of sites. And Fair Water Footprint is about changing that and making it mainstream, establishing water stewardship as the global business norm. That's what it's going to do. Take it to scale and strengthen the levers of change. So what are the levers of change? Well, you could approach this from a number of angles. So I'm breaking it down into 3 simple steps. First of all is sort of visibility and understanding of the impacts. As Virginia said, the water crisis is under-publicised. That's probably because a lot of the impacts hurt poor people and the environment, who, by their very nature, haven't got a voice. And so the first step is to drill into the impacts in our global economy, the negative water impacts in our global economy, through building on the great work of Arjun Hoekstra and Tony Allen, to take that global level assessment. Where do our water footprints land? We've updated some of that data a couple of years ago for UN Water. What it basically tells us is that we're profoundly dependent, the global north is profoundly dependent on water use in the global south for our daily needs. Food, clothing, stuff, computers, hugely, profoundly dependent. Typically, for between 50 and as much as 90% of our water needs are met externally to our countries. And a lot of that water is used in places in the global south, which are vulnerable to climate change and have weak water governance systems. The analysis also tells us that about 50% of that water use is unsustainable, pushing people, places, and ecosystems into extreme vulnerability. So Fair Water Footprint is about unpacking that and changing it. And understanding impact, what we then do with our teams, with our civil society partners, and scientists and journalists, is go and understand and ground truth what that water footprint looks like in reality, and tell the story, document the compelling evidence of the harms that we see, whether it's pollution or abstraction, put that together into scientific papers, into public-facing communication materials. What that investigation also does is allows us to understand forensically where the governance failures are that are leading to those unfair water footprints, whether it's national legislation, lack of finance, a bit of corruption, a bit of capture, or whether is it in the international, transnational institutions that are failing, trade agreements not prioritising sustainable water resource use, standard systems not quite getting it right, disclosure systems not asking the right questions. So the investigations in our supply chain hotspots allow us to do laser-guided advocacy for where the systems need to change, and that's to Virginia's point about red pen activism. And the third step is to pull those levers of change. So pushing on the market, stimulating market recognition signals to reward water stewardship and to punish the abuse of water in our supply chains, whether it's consumer choice, buyer preferences, competition, proactive investment or divestment, public policy changes, regulatory action. So pulling on all these levers of change dependent on what the diagnosis tells us. Now, if that all sounds a bit theoretical, I've got a quick example to bring it all to life, if I've got time.
Do it.
Chocolate and cocoa, right? You're probably aware 70% of the world's cocoa comes from West Africa, 40% of that from Côte d'Ivoire. Now, through some brilliant support that was provided by the Swiss government, SDC, if you're in the room, we were able to go and investigate some of the water use in some of these commodity supply chains. Now, nobody's really looked at cocoa because it's rain-fed, right? No problem. Wait a minute. What we found was really alarming. So we visited with the local university and some NGO partners and the government. We studied the 10 main sourcing locations in Côte d'Ivoire. And what we found was really upsetting. Biblical levels of wash access, right? We're talking open defecation, we're talking people drinking out of puddles and streams. And these are in villages that have supplied the major brands, and they'll be named when the report is published, for 50 years. These are villages that have been certified by Fair Trade and Rainforest Alliance as being sustainable sourcing places for the cocoa that we consume, for the chocolate we consume. So clearly some issues at stake. There's also a big problem with the climate impacts that have decimated the cocoa sector and led to a global cocoa shortage. And the smallholder farmers that produce our cocoa bearing the brunt of all that and being destitute and being pushed to deforest or not send their kids to school because of lack of resilience in that supply chain. So some big issues there. Now, but it's positive because the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive is requiring those chocolate brands to trace production back to the household, right? So there's a wave of questionnaires and surveys and knowledge and disclosure and tracking going on across West Africa, across the world in these supply chains. Guess what? There's no question on water. There's no question on whether a household has wash access or not. There's not a question on resilience. So the sector, before we've even published the report, we've got the big producers saying, can we sort this out? Can you tell us, why don't we work out how to include water security in these household level questionnaires? Because we want to make sure that we're not caught out on the front page of The Guardian, right? We don't want this. There's an opportunity. It's not going to solve it all, but once you start measuring access to wash in those supply chains, you're going to have to start managing it. And all of a sudden, you look at the numbers involved, that could reach 40 million people with knowledge of water security and action and collective action to solve the problem. So a quick example. There's
Excellent.
Not many stats, but a quick example. So we've got an example of evidence on the ground leading to advocacy, leading to systems change. And that's what Fair Water for Upwards is going to be about, with this coalition of partners, governments, businesses, banks, and NGOs and scientists to try and get the change we need at the rate we need it.
There we go. We told you we were going to think big. I mean, you started off by saying, humble ambition, we're going to rewire the global economy. And that's what it's about. You have to take these, these elements and you have to tap it into those supply chains and how the private sector is thinking and connect those dots and make sure that these things are represented. And so let's come to Philip as well. So as I said, based in Lagos in Nigeria. We're also working in Bangladesh. Parth is here from Bangladesh. So if you've got questions about that too, please find him as well. Philip is our RWA country lead, as I said, and he was previously the program manager for the Pact West Africa, working with the FCDO, also a technical advisor to GIZ, and he's worked across a number of different international organizations, NGOs, and governments on climate development and water work as well. And Philip, we've just heard about some of these issues and questions about where finance needs to come in here. It always kind of comes back to finance and where's the money? Where's the money flowing? What's that kind of story about the money? And we know there's a huge gap in financing for water as well. So again, just kind of kick us off with, how is the RWA changing how the private sector and particularly investors are thinking about water security in Lagos?
Thank you very much, Kate. And just to confirm that you can hear me very well?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Thank you. The Resilient Water Accelerator began implementation in Lagos, Nigeria on the 14th of March, 2023. And coming on the ground, the first thing we noticed, of course, is that initial fear of investors and financiers when you talk about the water sector. And so we had to initiate a model that was that's very inclusive and that hit the nail on the head on what the actual issues are and how best to address them. The Resilient Water Accelerator is a new initiative that focuses on attracting and increasing the flow of public and private finance into water resilience projects. And in Lagos, we do this following 4 specific models. The first work stream is where we try to work with the stakeholders, government and non-government, to understand the system, the water system in Lagos, and to build an agenda for the development of the Lagos water sector. And on this particular work stream, we are partnering with AROP to implement the city water resilience approach. Now, what the city water resilience approach seeks to do is to implement a kind of a diagnostic system that takes the city from the process, from the stage of understanding the technical challenges facing investment in the water sector to a point of identifying and developing technical interventions to implement against those challenges, and then developing an action plan on how the stakeholders can work together as a unit to implement these technical interventions and improve the water sector. On this particular tool, we've implemented a water resilience assessment and identified 6 priority challenges facing investment in the water sector in Lagos, and then moved to a stage of identifying 6 technical interventions that will address those 6 technical challenges identified earlier. And now we are currently at the stage of developing an action plan of how the Lagos State stakeholders, government sector stakeholders, the private sector, investors and financiers, CSOs and development partners can work together as a team with specific roles to play in implementing that action plan is to improve investment in the water sector of Lagos. And that's the first work stream. The second work stream is where we are working with key investors and financiers to co-develop water resilience project deals, that have specific focus on improving the resilience or water resilience of Lagos State, or the residents of Lagos State. Currently, we have about 42 projects that we've identified already in the pipeline, 42 water resilience projects. These include projects around municipal water supply, projects around wastewater management, and also projects around public toilet facilities that will reduce the level of open defecation and environmental pollution in the state. And out of these 42 projects that we have on the pipeline, we've been able to develop a selection criteria that we deployed and came up with about 12 high priority projects that we call the project portfolio that we see to be on the high end, that is really attracting interest from investors and financiers that we're engaging in Lagos State. And currently, we are working with those investors now to co-develop this project, so that while we are developing the projects, we also understanding what are the investment priorities, the investment requirements. What does these investors and financiers look at for them to consider a project, a water project, bankable? So the kind of investors we are engaging now, people that are already pulling in a lot of resources in the energy sector, for example, in transport and in telecoms. So the question now is, why you're not investing in water? So as we are engaging with them to co-develop projects, they are already letting us know those key priorities, the things they want to look at for them to be able to consider a water project bankable. And with that, the 12 projects on the portfolio are already going through different stages of development. And then the third stream of work is where we are working with the Lagos State government stakeholders to build targeted, to build their capacity in using the various means. For example, we are in the process now of commencing the development of a capacity building plan for water sector development in Lagos. We are also supporting the Lagos State government to develop templates that they can use to develop projects and bring out the core data that investors need to consider a project bankable. So this is the third stream of work that we're implementing in Lagos. And the fourth stream of work, and which is one that is quite exciting to us, is the Lagos Water Partnership. And this is a platform, a multi-stakeholder platform that we initiated in Lagos that brings all the core stakeholders in the water sector together, the government stakeholders, the private sector, the water users, investors and financiers and others, to come together as a unit to co-develop an investment agenda for the Lagos water sector. And the Lagos Water Partnership is divided into 3 tiers. The first tier, that is the Executive Council, that is the highest level decision-making arm of the partnership, and that is led by the Lagos State Governor, the highest political office holder in the state. And then we have the second tier, that's the middle tier, that's the steering committee. And this tier brings together management level representatives from priority identified investors and financiers and private sector institutions, as well as the government sector stakeholders. So we have the likes of CEOs and board directors of the key private sector firms and financiers and investors in Lagos coming together to engage with the government sector to look at the investment vision that is being developed, to first identify that, okay, this vision aligns with the government priority, but also for the private sector and financiers to be able to figure out how they can channel their resources into this vision to improve the Lagos State water sector. And then the third tier, which is the last tier, is the technical committee. And this consists technical level representatives from the same institutions that are represented at the steering committee. So at the steering committee, we have the management level representatives, but at the technical committee, we have the technical level representatives. And these are the people that meet on a more regular basis to identify projects, develop these projects, identify research and studies that needs to be conducted, assessments that needs to be conducted to inform project development, and then develop resolutions that is then taken to the steering committee for review and finalization, and then to the executive council for final decision making and approval. And one important thing to mention here is the Lagos Water Partnership is inclusive, not just in operation, but in management. So the steering committee, for example, is led by the Commissioner for the Ministry of Environment and Water Resources, that is the government sector, and co-led by a member of the private sector to ensure that there is that level of inclusion and ownership. And the Secretariat of the Partnership is also hosted by the Lagos State Government, Ministry of Environment and Water Resources. So this is the approach that RW is deploying in Lagos to bring investors into the table and to get them really involved in project deal development and improving the overall Lagos State water sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. And hopefully you're hearing lots of common themes here coming through about building into plans, about that communication, bottom up, top down, pulling it all together. And Serena, you were saying earlier about, we were talking about the number of different communication between different ministries. There's something like 35 different relevant government agencies and departments just in Lagos State who have got an interest in water. So a huge amount of coordination. I'm going to do, Nick, I'm going to give you another quick question, and you're going to have like 20 seconds to answer it, and then the same to Philip as well. I'm trying to manage your expectations. So, a quick fire round, and then we're going to come out for questions as well. So, Nick, you've talked about how getting these messages to boards, and I think messages is coming through strongly. Philip just talked about how do we get investors engaged. They come and say, why do we invest in water? Same true for the private sector. What's the single most impactful thing that you think we can do, Fair Water Footprint is doing, to get board level discussions to go, of course we've got to talk about water?
Great. We've been doing stewardship, or trying to support stewardship for 30 years. I know it seems difficult to imagine, but for about 30 years of trying to get the private sector and finance community interested and involved and acting on water. And they'll tell us straight, if you want C-suite to pay attention, you've got to make it an issue for our customers, our consumers, and our shareholders, or regulate. All right, so that's what Fair Water Footprint is trying to do. Get compelling evidence in the public eye, laser-guided advocacy to get regulatory change. And the theory of change seems to be holding. Your question you were going to ask about, what about scaring people away?
Yeah.
What we don't want people to do is to cut and run out of countries that face water insecurity, right? That's not what this is about. It's about constructive advocacy. It's about remedy where harms have been created. And the theory of change seems to be holding. Just quickly, Peru, Ica, probably the best example of an unsustainable water footprint on the planet, where most of our supermarket blueberries, grapes, and asparagus now come from, but the most unsustainable groundwater use on the planet, perhaps. The supermarkets are being convened by Chatham House. We're meeting them next week. A delegation to Peru to meet the Prime Minister to put water management up the agenda. And that's just a quick example of what we mean by fixing the political economy on water, making it an issue, making sure that sustainable water management becomes the norm rather than the exception.
Thank you for answering that so quickly. Philip, going to give you 20 seconds as well. So, the story whenever we go and talk to investors is no one pays for water. There's no revenue, there's no return, it's not at all commercial. What do you find like the biggest single argument that changes their perspective when you go and speak to them?
Thank you very much, Kate. Via the approach that we are deploying in Lagos, and like I mentioned earlier, the Lagos Water Partnership, the projects that we're identifying, we are co-developing these projects with the investors. And that, what we've understood is that is the best way to get the investors to really understand that there is a potential in the water sector to generate revenue, is to keep them involved in the development of these projects and also implementing different technical interventions. Now, one of the projects that we identified in Lagos, for example, the Adion Water Scheme, which is a public municipal water supply or water scheme worth about 170 million billion USD. And we brought investors together where we're developing these projects. And in the course of the project development and conducting different assessment, what we've got to understand is that people are already paying for water. There's just no structured means that they are making that payment, but they are paying for water. And if the scheme becomes live, people will be paying half the amount that they are currently paying for water in the state. And the investors were able to see the evidence of this. They're seeing the revenue generation model. They are even contributing technically to the revenue generation model that we are developing for these projects. And by that means, they are sometimes probably more hungry than us to see these projects become live and implemented in the state so that this revenue generation can become a reality for them. So keeping the investors involved in the development of the projects is the best way to really change that narrative. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Philip. So thank you, Nick and Philip. And then I'm going to call Nick back up onto the stage, and Serene, and maybe Virginia and Andy as well. We're going to have a little party up here. Hopefully Idris might still be on the line. Stay there, Philip, as well. So we're going to have a bit of a Q&A session now. And this is, I think, kind of my Taylor Swift moment. Come on up. So, you know how I didn't see Taylor Swift. I don't know if anyone here did, but I mean, she kind of had guest people who kind of joined her for part of her thing. And I can't quite see with these lights, which is why I'm also feeling a bit Swiftian as well. So we've got a couple of people who are going to give us a couple of questions to kick off. I've got one here, please go for it. And I think we've got one. I'm looking for Tanya, Christopher and Barbara. Yeah. Brilliant, there we go. And then we will take some other questions. I'm going to take all three of you now, and then we'll come to our esteemed guests to kind of reflect back on what we hear. So Christopher, let's come to you first.
I will use the mic. Okay.
Perfect.
No, I actually thought I had a pretty clear mind when I went into this room. I'm a little bit more confused now than I was before. I think you said a very, very good thing was about systemic, changing was to systemic. And I think that the local disorganized ownership of water, who owns water? I mean, who owns water? Who are you speaking to when you're asking for water? And are we having like 1 million different solutions which are all local? Or can we go to an investor and say, here you can create a systemic investment portfolio. You don't have to do a due diligence every single time. I think these kind of things, coordinating language and making sure that we actually speak with one tongue rather than like 1 million, is going to be extremely important. By the way, my name is Christopher. I'm coming from a bank, SEB. So that's that perspective. And I have the privilege of being one of the pioneers in the green mobilization. And I recognize a lot of the things which I'm hearing, but I think the one tone, the one language is extremely important in doing this. I've been spending my summer, the last 12 weeks, in a cellar in one of our headquarters, together with a couple of my best people looking at water. 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., only water. And we are here, it's quite clear. There's a $1 trillion market coming up over the next 20 years. Whatever that's 10 or 20, I don't know. It's a lot. It's a big market. Private company like Grundfos is going to be huge in doing that. I guess you won't leverage too much because it's a private company, right? Meaning that it will not be leveraging the scale that we need. So we have a scale problem. We have the knowledge, we have the technology. We don't have the scale. How do we get the scale? Through finance, through systematization. So we need to get our act together and speak the same language, addressing the needs, putting numbers of the needs, addressing it in the regions and in the themes that we need to address. You're going to do a great work in your lobbyism and in speaking. I've seen that in climate. You're going to do the same in water. I trust you. And we're all going to follow, or going ahead and you follow, back and forward. It's a team. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Maybe if you can pass the microphone back here.
Actually, the question was, who owns water?
Yes. Which is your starting point. Who owns water? Because that's an important one if we're going to get those policies and plans in place. Don't answer it yet. Hold that thought.
I'm not going to answer it, right?
No. We're going to hear.
You collect the questions first, I understand.
Sorry?
You're collecting the questions first?
Exactly.
All right. Okay. Great. Well, first of all, thank you very, very much for these pitches.
I'm working for the Asian Development Bank as a water resilience specialist, managing the Water Resilience Trust Fund by the Dutch government in the ADB. So water resilience as such is a challenge for me, because I recognize what Idris also said in terms of water governance. You really have to break the silos. You have to work cross-sectoral, and that is difficult, not only with the governments that we work with, but also in ADB, actually. It's learning by doing, but you really need to bring the people together when you work in water. And I'm only with ADB now for 1 year. I used to work for a firm comparable to Arab. So I very much understand the work you've been doing. I think I find it inspiring, especially the water resilience tracker really triggered me. So my question is also about the tracker. What I like to ask is how this tool can actually drive the accountability and action to ensure that the insights that you get from this water resilience tracker really result in tangible improvements, and either come up with some examples, some concrete examples that we can learn from, or what you would need to really turn it into action. And please don't say finance, but come up with some other options, and I'm happy to discuss it further in a later stage as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that question. And maybe if we can pass the microphone or back to Barbara at the back, and thank you, Tanya, for that question. And can we just check, is Idris still on the line? If not, then Ingrid might have to come and help answer the water tracker questions as well. Barbara.
Thanks very much. Barbara Schreiner here from the Water Integrity Network. And thanks for the presentations. Really, really interesting and really exciting. I just want to pick up on something. Serene talked about the importance of Southern partners having been put at the kind of in a real driving position in this. And I just wanted to follow up on that and understand from the kind of three elements of this program. How is that being carried through in ensuring that actually funding is flowing to partners in the South? That funding is available particularly to like the very marginalized communities that actually need to be part of this process if one is going to look at long-term sustainability. What is being put in place to ensure that this is aid funding, that it actually, a whole lot of it actually ends up with the people on the ground in the South, rather than being captured by us in the INGO sector? Thank you.
Good questions. Right. Okay, so we've collected some from Christopher, Tanya, and Barbara there as well. So why don't we'll come quickly down the line. Let's be quick, and then we'll make room for other questions in the room as well. And we'll come to Philip and Idris on the screen as well. So quick responses to whichever bits. There are some particularly for the water tracker for you to pick up.
Great.
But you're going to need to move forward to speak into the microphone.
Thank you, Chris. On the question of who owns water, now on the continent, the answer is usually God. That is how people generally answer when we're having issues or ask that question. But it belongs to the people of the countries, and the government is a custodian of that water. Now that is what is on paper. What is on the ground is approximately 40% government formal ownership and about 60% informal ownership. Now there have been efforts in terms of trying to ring fence, formalize, but also put order in the sector. And while that question can be answered, like I said, from a paper policy point of view, you're right, it is still a very difficult question to answer in reality. Most recently, we were sitting with a local government that was complaining bitterly about these community-based type of setups, that they were not presenting their audited accounts. And we were like, you did what? You went and asked them for audited accounts. They were like, yes, because by law, they're supposed to present these accounts. So we have zero idea of where the funding is actually going, or if it's supposed to be plowed back into Treasury, but it's not. It's being plowed back into their pockets. So I think this is where really the governance issue is really critical, even for investments with a bank, most recently the Africa Investment Program, we need about 30 billion on the continent to reach Vision 2030, or is it Vision 2633? One of our lofty visions. But the credit ratings were really poor, which I'm sure you know, in terms of governance and whatever have you. But I think moving forward for investors and banks, what would be really critical is not to shy away from this, but rather building risk resilience. And by that, in terms of supporting these countries to de-risk and become credit worthy and help them again in the governance. When we say as practitioners that governance is key in the water sector, it also in terms of impact or even affects the answer of who owns water. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Excellent. Let's come to Idris then, maybe on this sort of water tracker particular question and the accountability one.
Thank you, Kate. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So just to respond to the question that what actually happened on the ground. So phase one work on 10 countries, Egypt, Costa Rica, Panama, Malawi. So a list of 10 countries. Water resilience tracker was there. As a concrete example, let's say in Costa Rica, the results of the water resilience tracker made the government to adjust or update two of their national documents. One was the National Water Resources Management Plan, which is updated but not published. But another one was or is the National Adaptation Plan, which was updated after the results and published now. So there are examples of once you have the results, once you apply the water resilience tracker, then the understanding and the results of it, or the clarity that brings to in planning the climate action, that brings changes to national documents and the way the country is dealing with their national plans. So just to do more justice with to the water resilience tracker, I think Ingrid is in a good position to further add to this, because she is there from the first day when the water resilience tracker started.
Thanks, Idris. No, the Costa Rica example is actually a really good one that you mentioned, and you're asking the right question, Tanya, because we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, it's not just doing this analysis and then just saying, here you go, and
into the
good
microphone.
luck, right? Oh, can you not hear me? Oh, sorry. So in Costa Rica, one of the things that Idris was mentioning, so we get the results from the initial analysis, right? And it's not just going, there's a technical working group that goes through this process, and they're usually concentrated in one ministry. But then we take the results and we go across the different ministries, and we hold workshops, capacity building, and trainings. The innovation that we also did in Costa Rica is we held subnational. So we're kind of operating at the national level. Then we went down to the subnational. And then based on the feedback that we got from the subnational level, that actually changed some of the recommendations that we were making, and then that went back up into these updated plans and policies that they were making. And yes, finance is important, but also we need better projects that are actually matching the conditions on the ground and the things that the communities then bottom up are feeding back into this process. So we are talking top down a little bit sometimes, but there's also this kind of bottom up component that's ground truthing. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, what we're doing in the system. And in this next phase, there's actually countries that we'll be working with where we're actually starting at the subnational level, going back up. And so hopefully, that's a way to help institutionalize, I would say, the process that we're going through. I hope that helps answer the question.
Great. I'm going to try and move us on quickly so that we can get some, use the last couple of minutes of our time wisely. Nick, maybe you could say something about this kind of funding flowing question, and then Philip, maybe you can say something about that owning water question in the perspective of Lagos and what that means for investors as well. And I'm going to make you be quick as well, sorry.
Right, just quickly, the response to the questions is the same. Accountability needs to be really strengthened and bolstered. I'd say 90% of the countries on the earth, the state has the mandate to own and manage water on the public's behalf in public interest. That doesn't happen. There's an accountability gap. For years, donors have underfunded accountability monitoring by the civil society sector. A science has emerged around that work through some hard work with the likes of Water Integrity Network, through the Accountability for Water program. So we know that it works, we know what makes it work, and we know that it's been underfunded and undersupported because civil society needs long-term support to do the budget tracking, to do the bargaining, to make sure voices are heard at joint sector review processes, to hold the donors to account. The Fair Water Action Fund is going to be launched by Asias, could you stand up, and Walter and the team on Tuesday morning, so plug some on your table. That's a long-term support facility for civil society to do their essential work in hold us all to account. So that's a long-term facility to actually make that oversight role a reality with financial, technical and legal support. So come along, Tuesday morning breakfast meeting, you'll have a pastry and a coffee.
What's not to like? Philip, quick answer on the owning water.
Yes, thank you very much. We do receive similar questions as well in Lagos, especially from financiers and investors. And the understanding is always that if the people continue to consider water as owned and provided by the government, by God, and they will never see any reason why they will have to pay for a water facility that it was provided by the government. But then what we've done is through the Lagos Water Partnership and through the CWRA processes is help people to understand how much they are actually paying for water, even though they've not been putting it into account, and how less they will pay for water if there's actually a functional water supply scheme provided by the government. And now with that inclusion, getting their feedback into the project development, they are already showing that kind of interest in, paying for water, of course, when it's made available. And then from the investor side as well, they've always had that concern around the regulation, that if we invest in a particular water scheme, how are we sure that the environment is going to be regulated and, that the tariff that is coming in, the resources that is coming in from the people that are paying for water is really going to get into our accounts. So what we've done is, in partnership with DLA Piper recently, we conducted a regulatory due diligence assessment where we are beginning to understand the challenges in the regulatory environment of Lagos State. And with that, we are going to be developing interventions and working together with these investors to develop those interventions and implement them so that along the way, the concerns of the investors are really met in developing and implementing those interventions to support the regulatory environment in Lagos. And we're also conducting a water tariff and pricing study with Ernst & Young's, where we are also understanding, okay, how much are people actually paying for water in the different geopolitical zones of Lagos State, because that to a large extent will also inform the kind of water scheme you want to set in place to be sure that it's affordable by the people in those communities. And that study is already informing the development of the project. So to a large extent, we are addressing that challenge in Lagos State, and we see it to be replicable as well to an extent in major parts of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Ingrid, I'm going to do a time check with you. I think we got to. I'm really sorry. I did promise. But you now know what all of these people look like, so you can hunt them down and ask them questions as well. And thank you very much. And I'm going to pass back to Ingrid for some closing.
Yeah, just very briefly, I want to thank FCDO, obviously, as the group, Andy, Dan, and team for bringing us all together, and for investing in this coalition. We are very grateful for that. And I want to just very briefly go back to something Virginia said at the beginning about using interconnectedness as an advantage, pooling our ideas and learning together. So I think this is something that we all are hoping to do together as part of this coalition. And all I can say is please join us. I don't know if we can go. There's a final slide where you can learn more about these projects. As Andy mentioned, the last contract was literally just signed, so we don't have a cohesive website yet. It will come, but for each of these projects, we do have more information, so you can find it there. Thank you guys so much, and have a great week.
Thank you, Filippo. It was nice seeing you, brother.